If you know me, you know movies are my life. From a young age, I've always been fascinated by storytelling in general, but movies in particular. There have been so many movies that just captured my imagination, and to this day, more are coming out. Although this channel may seem opinionated and negative, it's time to show the love to the movies that really matter to me. It's hard to list and rank your favorite movies because they can always change, and I've put a lot of thought into this list. Even if the order changes later, I know that these 10 films will be the first I recommend in a conversation about film. So without further ado, these are my top 10 favorite movies. Number 10. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. One of the most fascinating and bizarre movies I've ever seen. Though the plot may seem non-existent, this movie is super entertaining. Much like how scientists say Interstellar is one of the most realistic depictions of space on film, people who have done hallucinogenic drugs have said this movie came closest to depicting it accurately. So what's the plot, you may ask? Well, at simplest form, it's about a journalist and his lawyer going to Las Vegas and indulging in drug-induced shenanigans. At its most complex, it's about a savage journey to the heart of the American dream, and only when you make it there you realize the American dream is dead. Based on a novel by Hunter S. Thompson, this is one of the most faithful adaptations I've ever seen. It strays very little from the source material, and when I actually got around to reading the book, I was surprised at how similar the two really were. This is my favorite Johnny Depp performance, bar none. Being a friend of Hunter S. Thompson himself, he really knew how to get his movements and mannerisms down. Honestly, sometimes I forget I'm watching Johnny Depp and I really think Hunter S. Thompson is on screen. This movie blew my mind and exposed me to the crazy style that is gonzo journalism. Number 9. Reservoir Dogs. The first feature from famous writer and director Quentin Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs is one of the coolest movies of all time. By far my personal favorite of his work. It's a heist movie that doesn't show the heist. That concept may sound boring, but trust me, it's not. Because the heist doesn't matter in this movie. What matters is character, and each of the cast members gives it their all. From Mr. Pink's cynicism to Mr. White's straight man routine to Mr. Blonde's stone cold psychosis, each character is memorable in their own special way. The soundtrack also plays a part in why this movie is so good. A crime movie with a sweet 70s soundtrack? How can you go wrong? Reservoir Dogs truly is an instant classic. Number 8.
Want to play games? Okay. I'll play with you. Want to play rough? Okay. Say hello to my little friend!
That's right, it's Scarface. One of the few remakes that exceed the original. So much so that not many people know it's a remake. Al Pacino as Tony Montana is the OG gangster. His performance is so awesome. He's a dick, but he's also charismatic and oddly charming in a way. He's an asshole to his sister, but it's really because he cares for her deep down. He's a cold hard criminal, but he also has standards.
No fucking way. Hey, no fucking way. That's it. Olvide eso. Matamos este tipo solo. Sin mujer y sin hijo.
This scene alone is so intense, and I gotta give credit to the soundtrack as well, because it really gives it a big boost.
You think I killed 2 kids and a woman? Fuck that! I don't need that shit in my life. You die, motherfucker!
I'm hesitant to say he's the gangster with a heart of gold because there is some undeniably bad stuff he does, but he's just likable enough where you feel for him. Much like Macbeth, it's a story of ambition and how absolute power corrupts absolutely. Number 7. Another remake that exceeds the original, but in my opinion, this is the greatest remake of all time. It's such a great movie that when people talk about the thing, they usually refer to this one as the original. A US outpost stationed in Antarctica gets a visit from a Norwegian guy chasing and shooting at a dog. They think the Norwegian guy is crazy and kill him out of self-defense, and take the dog in. But it turns out the dog is actually a shape-shifting alien that can duplicate your cells and look like you. paranoia spreads through the camp as they wonder who's human and who's not. Not to mention it's the first week of winter and a snowstorm is hitting them hard, so they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do they freeze to death and possibly let this thing infect humanity? Or do they fight it off and destroy it even if it costs them dying with it? We never really get an answer. The ending is left ambiguous. It's one of the smartest sci-fi horror movies, and all the characters are likable. It's one of those movies where you don't want to see these characters die, and that's what makes it even more horrifying. The horror really isn't with the monster, it's with the human condition. They have to work together to fight this thing, but they don't know who to trust. And that's terrifying. The creature effects by Rob Bottin are fucking astounding. This movie is the perfect example of practical effects being better than CGI. Unlike the 2011 prequel where the CG already looks outdated, this movie still looks good to this day, and this was 1982. And although the soundtrack won a Razzie when it first came out, I think the simplicity of the Thing theme is so creepy. Not to mention it's by the greatest composer of all time, Ennio Morricone, the guy who gave us that epic music you heard at the beginning of this video, so I think he deserves a little more respect. Although John Carpenter made Halloween and gave us the horror that is Michael Myers, I think this is by far his best movie. And I think fans would agree with me. This movie has something that most horror movies nowadays lack, and that's subtlety. Subtlety is what makes a horror movie. Instead of beating us over the head with jump scares, John Carpenter lets the atmosphere and the tension scare us. And that's why this is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Fuck you too!
Number 6. The Evil Dead. Pure low-budget charm and the quintessential Cabin in the Woods movie. When a group of friends go to a secluded cabin in the middle of the woods to party down, some weird things start to happen. When they check the cellar, they find the Book of the Dead, an odd text that contains bizarre burial rites and funerary incantations. They also find a Kandarian dagger.
This kind of looks like your old girlfriend.
And a tape recorder. They play the tapes, and it contains the voice of Professor Raymond Noby reading the incantations. But once the words are read, all hell breaks loose and the movie becomes a fucked up Three Stooges sketch. I mean, people get raped by trees, people get possessed, people get stabbed in the foot with a fucking pencil. It's just brutal. But the low-budget charm of it is so silly that it becomes enjoyable in a different way than the creators intended. Of course, when I first saw this movie, I was freaked out by it, and I can still see how people consider this a serious horror movie. But, I mean, look at Bruce Campbell there. He's acting like that shelf is the heaviest thing in the world, when really you'd be able to pick it up in 2 seconds. The movie got a lot of praise for its creative camera work and its unique idea, and the fan base is still alive today, spawning 2 sequels, video games, and recently a television series, which is awesome, and I highly suggest you check it out. This movie also started the career of director Sam Raimi, who would later go on to make the Spider-Man trilogy, and actor Bruce Campbell, who is now an icon of horror, and just a badass in general. If you haven't seen this movie already, I highly suggest you do. It's a good fun piece of spooky cheese. Number 5. Sin City is based on the comic by Frank Miller, the same guy who wrote The Dark Knight Returns and 300, and it was adapted into a movie in 2005, and it had an all-star cast. Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, Benicio del Toro, Michael Clark Duncan, Rosario Dawson, Clive Owen, Elijah Wood, Jessica Alba, and not only directed by Robert Rodriguez, but the comic creator himself, Frank Miller, and Quentin fucking Tarantino as a guest director. Jesus Christ, this movie is awesome. The film takes most of the stories from the original comics and just puts them all into one flowing narrative, which is effing awesome. We got Marv looking for revenge for a dead hooker named Goldie. We got Dwight dealing with killing a cop in a whore's territory, which starts a war between the two. There's also Hardigan, who saves a little girl named Nancy and then goes to jail for years and comes back to see little Nancy, now a stripper, whose life is still in danger. And there's so much more than that, I've barely even scratched the surface. So let's talk about the performances. Everybody in this movie gives a really good performance. Even Jessica Alba, who I don't even think is that great of an actress, does a really good job in here.
She grew up.
And I love the style of this movie. They tried their hardest to make this look exactly like the comic book. I'm normally not a big fan of blue screens and green screens and computer effects, but they needed it for this movie. They didn't just use it for the hell of it, even though they could have used real sets, like some other directors. A word of warning to the squeamish, though. This movie is violent as hell. It's just all non-stop action, and yet still leaves room for character development. That's damn impressive. So if you have the chance to see it, do so. It's one of the best comic book adaptations you can get. It's on par with Watchmen. So, that's all I have to say. Number 4. King Kong 1933, the original. I saw this movie as a kid, and I was never the same since. Although it's not number 1 on this list, I truly believe it is the greatest movie ever made. That's right, Citizen Kane, Casablanca, step aside. This is the king. Just playing around, I've never seen either of them. Sue me. Sure, you could say the romance was flat.
Say, I guess I love you.
Or you can complain about the sexism.
I think this is awfully exciting. I've never been on a ship before.
Well, I've never been on one with a woman before.
Or the racism.
Someday me go back China, never see no more potato.
But it was a different time, and that has nothing to do with why this movie's so great. This movie is great because it changed the way films were made forever. This movie came out during the Great Depression, and its setting and effects gave people an escape. But it also has some charm to it. It's the classic tale of Beauty and Beast, and you actually get to feel for Kong, so much so that I can't help but get teary-eyed when he dies. I always saw myself in the character Carl Denham, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Pretty much I relate to him because he'll do anything to get his film made. One of my favorite lines he says is that he'll get a leading lady in his movie even if he has to marry one. Robert Armstrong puts so much energy in the performance that you just have to love him. And let's not forget the beautiful Fay Wray as Ann Darrow, the original Scream Queen. Sure, you could say her scream gets annoying after a while, but personally to me, I find it funny. And again, her character has such positive energy that you just can't help but love her. But the main reason I love this movie is because I just get wrapped up in the whole world of it, and the whole adventure and camaraderie of it. It's just a fun movie to watch. King Kong is the definition of a classic. Number 3. American Psycho. So if you know me, you know I obsess over this story. The book, the movie, all of it. I love it. The movie centers around Patrick Bateman, who is one of the most fascinating characters ever put to any form of media. By day, he works on Wall Street. By night, he's a cold-blooded killer. Though it's never clear whether he's really doing the murders or if it's all inside his head, because Patrick Bateman is revealed to be an unreliable narrator. But the killings aren't what make this movie good. What makes this movie good is the social satire and the dark humor mixed with some genuinely creepy moments. Based on the book by Bret Easton Ellis, the social commentary is on point. The meaningless things these people obsess over is more insane than anything Patrick Bateman does. Much like a Tarantino movie, every character is despicable in their own little way, and they're all just trying to top each other, like I said in my review of the book. They're not really friends, they're all just trying to be better than one another. Patrick Bateman is a good example of what a society could do to you. You can tell he's trying to fit into a world where he just doesn't. He's become another cog in the machine, and on one hand you get the feeling he doesn't like it, but on the other hand, he knows no other way. But there's two ways to look at this movie, and it all depends on how you perceive it. On the one hand, he really is committing the murders, but the society he lives in is so conformist that he never gets exposed for the psychopath he is, no matter how hard he tries. There are several scenes where he's mistaken for other businessmen, but you also get the feeling that even he doesn't know who he is. He could have been thrown into this society of greed at a young age and never got a chance to develop or find himself. Which leads into the second theory, that he didn't commit the murders and that they are all just sick fantasies in his head, created by the society that he lives in because it's the only way he could express himself. Or it could be both. Who the hell knows? Even Bret Easton Ellis himself said when he was writing the book he had no idea if Patrick Bateman was really committing the murders or not. He just went along for the ride. And honestly, whether he did the murders or not doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things, because really what matters about this movie is the social satire. This is by far Christian Bale's best performance. He's such a dick, but he's also so enjoyable to watch. Sure, he has his creepy moments, but really he's a downright Looney Tunes character.
Hey,
Listen, I cannot understand you. This is crazy. You're a fool. I can't cope with the stupid bitchy. Understand?
Really, the whole cast was perfect. But I think it's time we move on because, honestly, I could talk about this movie for hours. So much so that I've considered making a documentary about the whole thing. This movie may not be for everyone, but I suggest you watch it at least once. And if you're a sick fuck like me, you'll find it to be the most quotable movie ever.
Mistletoe alert.
Number 2.
Something strange in the neighborhood. Who you gonna call?
Ghostbusters. No, not this piece of shit. The original. Possibly the greatest comedy ever made. And the reason is because they don't treat it like a comedy. It has a story. They don't stop to tell a joke every 2 seconds. The dialogue is just naturally funny. Unlike that other movie where the film comes to a halt just so they can tell a stupid joke that goes nowhere. Alright, enough remake bashing. The reason why this movie works is because it was just lightning in a bottle. In a way, it was a happy little accident. You have a bunch of equally talented and funny actors on set, they each have a different idea on where the movie should go, yet the movie is still successful. Much like Reservoir Dogs, it's character that makes the movie as opposed to spectacle. Though the spectacle is great in this movie, the characters are what make us invested. From Bill Murray's dry wit, to Dan Aykroyd's upbeat and bumbling personality, to Harold Ramis's deadpan, no-nonsense delivery, this movie is just hilarious. I love Bill Murray, but I don't know, Harold Ramis cracks me up in this.
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
This movie also knows how to handle tone well without it feeling out of place. This movie for the most part is a comedy, but there are some genuinely terrifying moments. I feel like this and Star Wars get unnecessarily labeled kids movies, even though they're not. Sure, kids can watch them, but especially with Ghostbusters, there's some heavy shit and adult jokes.
I want you inside me.
Go ahead. No, I can't. Sounds like you got at least 2 people in there already.
It just goes to show how much balls movies had back then and how less stuck-up audiences were. I mean, that new movie seems so dickless because it didn't take any chances. And don't say casting women was a risk, because it wasn't. Although I made jokes, I was fine with it from the start. Bottom line is, this movie's one of the greats.
Is this true?
Yes, it's true. This man has no dick.
And my number 1 favorite movie of all time is... Jaws. I remember there was once a time where I used to watch this movie every day. I'm not joking. I've always been fascinated by sharks. They're probably my favorite animal. I grew up watching Shark Week and they would always talk about Jaws on there. But I had never seen it. But some family members owned it, so I asked if we could watch it one day. I remember at the beginning, just John Williams' score alone made me feel so on edge that I started gripping a pillow. Like I was saying before with Ghostbusters, this movie had balls. I mean, they kill a kid, man, and I'm not talking about some Revenge of the Sith cutaway bullshit. We see a child turn into a geyser of blood. Try getting away with that shit nowadays and see if you get a PG rating. What can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? The direction, great. The score, amazing. The special effects, jaw-dropping. And the characters, lovable. Brody's the everyman who you feel for, and you could say he's a fish out of water, if you will. Richard Dreyfuss as Matt Hooper is charming as usual. And Quint? Well, Quint is an enigma. One moment he's a silly old sailor singing sea shanties. Next minute he's going on some long disturbing monologue about how he was on the USS Indianapolis when it sank and all his friends were killed by sharks. And that's how unpredictable Robert Shaw is in the role. I swear to God, his acting is practically Shakespearean. Although I rag on jump scares a lot, this movie has a really effective one that still gets me to this day. In the end, I know this movie like the back of my hand, and every time I watch it, I get the same feeling I got when I watched it for the first time so many years ago. And that's why it's my favorite movie of all time.
Smile, you son of a...
So those are my top 10 favorite movies. I bet you were surprised that Star Wars was nowhere on here. Well, there's a lot of movies that I wish I could have put on this list, but you can only fit 10, so... maybe I'll make a runners-up list soon. Anyway, FDV, signing off.